you have this asset and everyone's looking to you for answers. But at the same time, yes, you have to answer, to those shareholders and stakeholders. But the machine that works to get there is a function of, the work and collaboration of all the people. So that means that the individuals that are working at the company are really the assets, and you have to learn how to sympathize or really put yourself in their position and really think about other folks, not just yourself.
Welcome to Startup Health Now, the podcast where we celebrate the entrepreneurs and innovators transforming health around the world. I'm your host, Logan Plaster. My guest this week is Brian Neman, the CEO and founder of Sanguine Biosciences, a company that joined Startup Health in 2018. Brian and his team first made a splash by bringing an at-home, on-demand business model to specimen collection for clinical trials. Instead of having to get yourself to a lab, you could tap a few buttons on your phone and a nurse or phlebotomist would show up at your house and take your blood. That business has evolved significantly over the years and grown quite a bit, which we'll get into on the call. But the spark for the interview had more to do with people than products. You see, Brian's company was just listed on the Forbes list of 100 best small workplaces and top 10 in biopharma. He was on Inc.'s list of fastest growing private companies and Comparably named him on their list of best CEOs for women and for diversity in the workplace. So I wanted to dial Brian up and learn about how he cultivates company culture, particularly in an era of remote work. It's always great to catch up with Brian, and he had loads of wisdom to share, so I hope you enjoy. Brian Neman, CEO and founder of Sanguine. Thanks for joining me today on Startup Health.
Thanks for having me, Logan. Good to see you.
We've been following your work for the last many years, but particularly over the last 5 or so years, and really seen exciting growth. Saw you pop up on a couple of exciting lists this year and wanted to check back in with you and learn about what the last year looked like for Sanguine and just learn a little bit about how you run your business. So why don't you start with just re-familiarizing our audience with what Sanguine is and what you're building over there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sanguine, what we're doing is we are making it easier for patients to participate in research all the way through digitizing the consent process, home visits, and a very personalized approach. And through that ease of administration and convenience and transparency comes speed, additional data collection, and really just better research for those researchers at academic institutions, universities, and pharmaceutical companies discovering new life-changing therapies. So, yeah, that's our business. And the past.
What does that look like? What does that look like on the ground for the individual taking part in a clinical trial?
Yeah, so we work in both preclinical and clinical trials, and the difference there is that in preclinical studies, really specimen, just blood or urine or the different specimen like that is required versus a clinical trial. They're going to require many more activities, maybe infusion or injection of a drug, things like that. For a participant, the process has become easier over time. You'll search our website for different studies that you can participate in, and you'll sign up online. You'll have a study coordinator call you and run you through our consent and the research process and what the study is actually going to do to help research in your condition. And then we'll schedule a home visit for a blood draw, and we'll be at your home within about a week and a half, and take it from there. Samples delivered to the researcher to start working on their therapies.
For anybody watching this that's not particularly familiar with the old way of doing clinical trials, kind of paint us a picture of the challenges and the barriers that existed that this is trying to address.
Yeah, so the current market demands that the research subject or the research participant have to go into a medical center or a clinic or a hospital for each and every visit. And the difference is that with Sanguine, you don't have to go into a site for each of your visits. We could do a blood draw at home. We can do any sort of specimen collection or a diary or a patient-reported outcome assessment over Zoom or phone or what have you. So
Now, you were doing this type of work before COVID, and I can only imagine how COVID sort of accelerated the decentralization of clinical trials, the desire for people to do things safely from home. So, how did COVID impact your business?
yeah, two ways. One, there was a material increase in requests, imaginably so, for samples from patients diagnosed with COVID. So that was tailwind one. Tailwind number two was the increase in uh, interest to participate in the home by patients or research subjects, and then the demand that really met the demand from researchers, because most individuals and research participants didn't want to go into a hospital or a clinical setting. So through that increased convenience, the number of interested individuals increased materially. So
How did that translate into actual growth for the business over the last few years?
yeah, so since the beginning of COVID, I'd say roughly a 200% increase. So over the past 2.5 years, there's been
Got it.
a material increase there, and really what we're most proud of is how we were able to participate in the COVID vaccine. So we have a couple of published papers with Pfizer where it indicates that we were the supplier of COVID-19 samples and specimen for development of their vaccine.
Now, Brian, we're talking about kind of the growth in your business from during COVID and your role in helping to decentralize clinical trials and speed them up, make them safer. But actually, the reason why I wanted to have this call was because we saw your name recently on a number of impressive lists, including the Forbes best small businesses, the best small companies to work for. And so we wanted to sort of break that down and understand kind of what you're doing over there that's unique. So did that award come as a surprise?
Yeah, I think, when you're working hard for 10, 12 years, you're really just, you learn to fall in love with the day-to-day grind, and you rarely, put your head up and, think to yourself, oh, wow, we have these awards and prizes. So, for us, it was a surprise, frankly. And, as you mentioned, we had a few awards this year. So I think that what we're most proud of is that we were able to grow quickly. So with the Inc. 2000, so we're on Inc. 5000, we're number 2038. And on the other end, we won a couple of Forbes awards, including a top 7 small, medium biotech and biopharma. And then I think number 38 on the Forbes best small business in America. So what we're proud of is that we could have that fast growth, but at the same time have have a good culture. And I think that that's pretty tough to achieve. For us, we like to run a business that's healthy. So of course, top line, revenue growth is important, but also, what we're doing to make life easier while working at the company is important, because ultimately you want to go to a place where you enjoy the people that you're working with, that has a comfortable environment that matches your values. So doing that and generating positive growth was exciting to us, and I think a lot of that has to go back to our values, and we're pretty strict about that, and we have semi-annual reviews where we grade folks not just on performance but also on behavior. So.
Okay. So give me some rules of the road, some do's and don'ts for creating a culture that really bolsters your employees and makes them want to come in every day.
Yeah, I think a healthy dialogue is important. So being respectful, using professional language, I think is absolutely critical. I think a problem solver mindset of which really means, not having energy, mental energy and physical energy to solve problems and essentially use your brain. I think that those are, pretty big values for us and kind of define the environment that we're working with.
Give an example of what you mean by using professional language.
I think like precision of dialogue is critical. So when you're giving feedback to folks, I think that precision is important. So communication, I mean, if you think about it now, like we're all on Slack, like communicating with each other. And a lot of the communication can tend to become less, you don't have to be formal all the time, but if you're becoming lazy in your speech, you're not being precise. And so there's miscommunication, confusion, and in some cases, like increased intensity. So I think that's important. I mean, working remotely, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. You almost have to write a whole new rule book for etiquette in the remote workplace, don't you?
Yeah, and like other companies, we're struggling with it, but at least we're putting our foot forward and deciding like what are the key values that are most important to us, and making sure that we remind folks of that, and keeping ourselves accountable, including myself.
Yeah. How many employees are at the company?
I believe 100 and 110, 105.
How do you think the average employee would describe you as a CEO?
Well, I haven't had the privilege of meeting everybody, but I'd like to think that they would describe me as a focused, meaning not really distracted with too many things that don't matter. I'd say focused, determined, and I think one of the values of like lifelong learning. So that's one of our other values. I think that's probably how folks will describe me, that I'm always interested in learning and becoming better. And, many of other employees at the company feel the same way about themselves, and I see them the same way.
Are there concrete ways that you nurture that in your employees, encouraging them to be lifelong learners?
Yeah, we in some cases we reimburse for additional training and learn. And, we wish that we had additional capital and resources to subsidize learning for as many people as possible, but we're slowly deploying more capital towards outside activities in that regard. We also give flexible work schedules for folks that are taking like master's courses or night courses and certifications, things like that. Nice. Sharing books, so we have like a reading list that's going around, so things like that.
Nice. I saw that Comparably put you high on a list of CEOs leading women and CEOs leading diverse teams. And I was curious about that because we just launched a new health equity initiative at Startup Health that's going to become a framework for how we work with all of our hundreds of startups. And so I was curious what your sort of mindset and mental framework was around thinking about diversity in the workplace.
Yeah, it's like the best way to describe it is that the concept of diversity, equity, inclusion, and all those concepts weren't, as they're described now, weren't at the forefront of our minds. We really, I think we've achieved a good portion of those objectives by virtue of looking to create a good business that maximizes, price per share. And the way to do that is to have as many smart people working hard and happy as possible. And whatever the race, gender, and whatever criteria you want to use, these items don't necessarily matter to us as much as the performance, because our focus is performing a strong business. So that's why I say it was really a byproduct of just, if we focus on creating a good business that's great to patients, great to researchers, great to investors and employees, then a byproduct of that, hopefully, is being thoughtful of your stakeholders, including women and folks of diverse backgrounds.
These multiple lists, 4 or 5, what we've already discussed, really point to, your work as a leader and a manager. And yet kind of what I hear you saying is, by building a great company and focusing on the product and focusing on, just all the aspects of the business itself. It helps create the environment people want to come to. And I'm kind of curious, how much of your time do you spend thinking about the management of your team versus this other idea, hey, if we maximize the business, people will love being here because we're running a great business?
That's a good question. We have some great managers that help me and advise me on different roles. Our VP of HR, marketing, CFO, VP of operations, and my partner of 10 years, Gerald Lee. We're focused on really building that good business, and just as a function of that, we use management different techniques and thought process as a function of maximizing those outcomes, revenue, expenses, and things like that.
Are there any strategies that you have employed to kind of build that culture that didn't work, that you had to learn from and kind of pivot away from?
I'd say that so far over the past 3 years, 4 years of running the business, our VP of HR deserves all the credit in terms of instituting the values, helping us define those, and then measuring against those and managing against those. So Catherine deserves the credit there. I think that in the first half of building the company, the first 5 years, obviously I was still developing as a leader. I really didn't have a good framework of what I think that how I defined my values, Gerald's values, and then how we managed against those. So we didn't really know what our values were. We're still developing that. And then how you use those tools and a framework to measure against that. So those were underdeveloped, but I think, so if your question is like, what's worked, I think that taking the first step in defining those values first and then measuring against them, that's always a great first step. And that's the biggest piece of the process.
If you were mentoring a younger founder early in their process and they had not defined their core values yet, what are some words of advice you might give them during the process? How to come up with the right list that's going to bring the culture of their company together?
Yeah, I think that the values are really a function of what the leaders of the company aren't going to compromise on. And there are some things, not everyone wakes up, attending to those values every single day. That's, perfectly. That's exceptionally difficult to do. But over the long run, conceptually, like, what are you not going to compromise on? And we felt a lifelong learning. There was no way we were going to compromise on that. Problem solver attitude, healthy dialogue, and teamwork and collaboration. Like these were things we're not going to. So what I would suggest to a founder is to define themselves, understand themselves, and what they would not tolerate in the workplace, that they wouldn't want to compromise on. And the second piece of advice is tame the ego.
How have you, that's nice to say, but in running a business, people can kind of shy away from the conflict necessary to tame an ego. So any tips about how to do that managerially?
Yeah, I think, if I'm speaking to founders, my message is that you have this asset and everyone's looking to you for answers. But at the same time, yes, you have to answer to those shareholders and stakeholders. But the machine that works to get there is a function of the work and collaboration of all the people. So that means that the individuals that are working at the company are really the assets, and you have to learn how to sympathize or really put yourself in their position. And really think about other folks, not just yourself, because even if it's if you're thinking about the business and how you're going to respond, yes, you're not thinking of maximizing your own outcomes. You're often thinking about stress. How do we sign that next contract and so on. Many times that's just about you. You're not always thinking about, okay, what about the other people? How is it going to impact others? So that's something that I think that every founder needs to learn.
Yeah. I know you give a lot of the credit to your head of HR, but I'm wondering, in terms of developing company culture, are there any books or resources, podcasts that you've leaned on that you would recommend to another founder?
Oh God, where do I start? Jason Lemkin's books are great. Impossible to Inevitable. Aaron Ross with Predictable Revenue. Ray Dalio's Principles. There are plenty. I think that the one that helped clarify for us, like how to manage the business, is The Outsiders. And it shows how, if you're really ruthless about creating a successful business that maximizes share price, that means you're also going to be ruthless about making sure that people are happy and incentivized, and you're running a good business.
Yeah. Putting on your sort of futuristic hat, thinking forward 5-10 years, help us understand sort of the future of decentralized clinical trials. Where do you see the industry heading?
That's a great question. I think that what we're seeing now is a harmonization of data through different health systems. I think there are different tools out there that are harmonizing medical records, patient-reported outcomes, and specimen data. I think that combining all of that into a central repository is pretty critical. You just saw the announcement with Invitae and Citizen and Praxis. Praxis Precision Medicine submitted an IND to the an NDA to the FDA with just real world evidence and data, with actually running the study, from my understanding. So my thought is that data and the ability to harmonize it and bring it all together and to collect as much of it as possible in an anonymized and private form is really going to accelerate where we're going. So that's on the data side. In terms of logistics and decentralized trial, I think that there will be a material increase in the number of cell and gene therapy trials, just because we haven't seen anything like it in terms of its efficacy and its really the approval rates. So we're excited to see where that's going. And so I think that there are going to be many cell and gene therapy trials in the next few years.
Very nice. And last question, what's the big headline that we should be looking forward to coming from Sanguine? What's going to be the big news over the next 6 to 12 months?
I think it's around those two initiatives that I just shared with you. It's about, we've engaged 60,000 plus patients over the past decade, and we know them well. And we're focused on aggregating data in that regard, and then seeing how that works with cell and gene therapy to accelerate studies on that level for allogenic therapy, and finding a way to engage our patient advocacy groups, the nonprofits that we work with. So
awesome. Brian, it's been awesome to see your company grow over the last 5 years. I have no doubt we'll see you again on some of these lists in Forbes and in Inc. and Comparably. Really admire the work that you're doing as a CEO and building a culture that supports your people. So thank you.
Thank you, Logan. Great to see you again.
Right. Take care. Be well.
Thanks for listening to Startup Health Now. Startup Health invests in health transformers around the world who are dedicated to achieving audacious health moonshots. If you want to learn how you can join this community of entrepreneurs, or if you want to connect with one of our 400 companies, go to startuphealth.com. If you'd like to learn how you can invest in our Health Moonshot Impact Fund, go to healthmoonshots.com. Thanks for listening to Startup Health Now. We'll be back again with another episode next week.